I am Dominic, 59 years old, a retired mechanic who spent decades fixing engines instead of relationships. When my son Jackson sent me an expensive bottle of Macallan whiskey for my birthday, I was surprised. We barely speak anymore, and this sudden generosity felt suspicious. So I did something unexpected. I gave that bottle directly to Harold, my son's father-in-law. What happened next changed our family forever, in ways none of us could have imagined. Let me tell you how a simple bottle of whiskey revealed the truth we all needed to hear. If you are enjoying this story, please let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to join me for more stories about healing family wounds that seem impossible to mend. The distance between a father and son can sometimes feel wider than any ocean. For 35 years, I worked at Morrison Auto Shop, my hands perpetually stained with grease and my back aching from bending over engines all day. Every minute of that hard labor was for Jackson, my only child, my pride and joy. I wanted him to have the opportunities I never had, to reach heights I could only dream of. Life took a cruel turn when Margaret, my wife and the love of my life, was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer when Jackson was just 13. For 2 years we fought alongside her, but the disease was merciless. I still remember the rainy April morning when she squeezed my hand for the last time, making me promise to make sure Jackson would have a good life. When Margaret passed, Jackson was 15, right at that difficult age when a boy needs both parents the most. Suddenly, I was playing both roles, trying to be the nurturer and the provider. I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning, prepare breakfast and lunch for Jackson, drop him off at school, work my regular shift at the shop, then pick up extra hours in the evening. Those years are a blur of exhaustion, grief, and determination. Jackson was a brilliant kid. He had his mother's sharp mind and quick wit. His grades were exceptional, and by his senior year, he was accepted to several prestigious universities with scholarship offers. I remember feeling an overwhelming pride mixed with terror about how I would cover the remaining costs. I took out a second mortgage on our modest home, sold our second car, and picked up weekend work at a construction site. Nothing was too much sacrifice if it meant Jackson could have a better future. But as Jackson excelled academically, something began to shift between us. The phone calls from university became shorter and less frequent. During his breaks, he would spend only a few days at home before going off with his new college friends, kids from wealthy families who vacationed in places I could only see in magazines. After graduating with honors, Jackson took a job at a prestigious financial firm in the city 3 hours away. His salary as a starting analyst was more than I had ever made after decades at the shop. He moved into a sleek downtown apartment and began to build a life that seemed increasingly distant from mine. It was at a company event that he met Amanda, the elegant and sophisticated daughter of Harold Thompson, a successful real estate developer. From the moment Jackson mentioned her name, something in his voice changed. There was a reverence when he spoke about her family, their connections, their lifestyle. When Jackson finally brought Amanda to meet me, I spent days preparing. I fixed the sagging front step, repainted the living room, and even bought new dishes. I wanted to make a good impression. But the moment Amanda stepped into my humble home, I saw it in her eyes. That quick assessment, the slight downturn of her lips as she took in the worn furniture and simple decorations. She was polite, of course, complimenting my homemade lasagna, but her eyes kept darting to her designer watch. Jackson seemed different around her, almost like he was performing. He barely mentioned his childhood or our life together, instead focusing on his recent work achievements and future plans. When Amanda excused herself to take a phone call, I asked him if he was happy. He seemed surprised by the question and said, "Dad, do you know who her father is? Harold Thompson practically owns half the commercial real estate downtown. The wedding was planned at the Grand Hilton, with over 300 guests, most of whom Jackson had never mentioned to me. 2 weeks before the event, over dinner at an expensive restaurant I could barely afford, Jackson cleared his throat and said something I will never forget. "Dad, about the wedding. We have decided on a certain aesthetic, and Amanda and her family have very specific ideas about how everything should look." His eyes avoided mine. "We think it might be best if you attend as a guest rather than being part of the wedding party. No walking down the aisle or speeches. You understand, right? It is just not the right fit for the atmosphere we are trying to create." I nodded and smiled, not wanting to cause a scene. But inside, something broke. The boy I had sacrificed everything for was ashamed of me, of my rough hands and simple ways. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, looking at old photos of Jackson as a child, wondering where I had lost him along the way. After the wedding, our relationship became even more distant. Jackson and Amanda bought a house in the same exclusive neighborhood as her parents. My invitations to visit were met with vague promises of "when things settle down." Meanwhile, I saw their vacation photos on social media trips to Europe and Asia, always with Amanda's parents in tow. The transformation was complete when Jackson began referring to Harold as his mentor and father figure in conversations. "Harold says this, and Harold thinks that." Each mention was like a small knife in my heart, a reminder that the son I raised now looked to another man for guidance and approval, a man who had never seen him take his first steps or comforted him after nightmares. I tried not to be bitter. After all, I had raised Jackson to seek better opportunities to climb higher than I ever could. But I had never expected that his ascent would mean leaving me behind, like an old ladder no longer needed once the roof is reached. Retirement came for me at 57, slightly earlier than planned, due to persistent back problems from decades of physical labor. The shop owner, Bill, who had become a good friend over the years, gave me a modest pension and a toolbox engraved with my name. "For the best damn mechanic I ever knew," the inscription read. My days took on a new rhythm. I joined the local mechanics club where retired tradesmen gathered to restore vintage cars for charity. I started teaching myself guitar using YouTube video, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. My small house was finally paid off, a victory that felt hollow, with no one to share it with. My 59th birthday approached without much fanfare. Frank, my oldest friend from the shop, promised to come by with pizza and beer. I had learned not to expect anything from Jackson, who had forgotten my birthday entirely the previous year, only to send a generic e-gift card 3 weeks later with a text saying, "Sorry, been swamped at work." So when the delivery truck pulled up to my house a day before my birthday, I was genuinely surprised. The package was expertly wrapped in matte black paper with a silver ribbon, the kind of packaging that screams expense before you even know what is inside. I carefully opened it to find a wooden box containing a bottle of Macallan, 18-year-old whiskey, its amber liquid gleaming behind the glass. The attached card simply read, "Happy birthday, Dad, Jackson." No personal message, no phone call to accompany it, just those 3 words. Still, I felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this was Jackson's way of reaching out, of beginning to bridge the gap between us. I immediately called him, but the call went to voicemail. I left a message thanking him for the thoughtful gift. An hour later, he texted back, "Glad you like it. Crazy deadline on this project. We'll call when things calm down." That evening, Frank came over as promised. When he spotted the whiskey on my counter, he let out a low whistle. "Wow. Macallan 18. That is some serious stuff. Is not that what Harold is always bragging about collecting? Last time I saw you both at Jackson's housewarming, he would not shut up about his whiskey collection. I had not made the connection, but Frank was right. At the few family gatherings I had attended, Harold often held court about his extensive whiskey knowledge, discussing aging processes and distilleries like they were his personal friends. I remembered now how Jackson would stand beside him nodding appreciatively, though I knew my son had never shown any interest in fine liquors before meeting Amanda's family. Curious, I looked up the bottle online and felt my stomach sink when I saw the price tag. Over $300. It was undoubtedly generous, but something about it felt off. Jackson had never been particularly attuned to my preferences. He did not seem to remember that I had not touched hard liquor in years, due to medication for my liver problems, something his mother had always been vigilant about. The more I thought about it, the more I suspected this was not a personally selected gift. Perhaps it was something Jackson's company had given to all employees that he simply passed along. Or maybe it was one of many identical gifts he had ordered his assistant to send out. The lack of personalization stung more than I wanted to admit. "You know," Frank said, munching on pizza, "I bet Jackson just got a case of these from his fancy firm and figured he would check you off his list." "Maybe," I replied, trying not to let disappointment color my voice. "Or maybe he just does not know what his old man likes anymore." That night after Frank left, I sat looking at that bottle for a long time. It was beautiful, certainly, and expensive, but it represented everything that had gone wrong between Jackson and me. It was a gift that screamed obligation rather than connection, selected for its price tag rather than its meaning. A gift for someone Jackson thought I should be, not for the person I actually was. I placed it back in its elegant wooden box and made a decision that would change everything, though I did not know it at the time. Harold Thompson was everything I was not. Tall, imposing with perfectly maintained silver hair, and bespoke suits that probably cost more than my monthly pension. He had a way of entering rooms that made people straighten their posture, a confidence born from decades of people saying yes to him. Our first meeting had been at Jackson and Amanda's engagement party. Harold had shaken my hand firmly, assessed me with a quick glance, and said, "So you are the mechanic. Good honest work. We need more people like you keeping things running for folks like us." The condescension was subtle but unmistakable. Over the years, our interactions had been limited, but consistently uncomfortable. At Jackson's graduation dinner, Harold had pulled me aside, glass of whiskey in hand, and said, "You know, Dominic, I think Jackson is really finding his footing, now that he has proper guidance. Amanda tells me he never even owned a proper suit before she took him shopping." He had chuckled as if we were sharing a joke, oblivious to the sting of his words. But the comment that had burned itself into my memory came during a rare family barbecue at Harold's lakeside home. After several drinks, he had put his arm around Jackson's shoulders and loudly proclaimed, "Look at this young man. Brilliant, ambitious, going places. I am the father Jackson should have had." He had then glanced at me and added, "No offense, Dominic," as if that afterthought could erase the insult. I had swallowed my pride that day, as I had so many times before. But the whiskey sitting in my kitchen now stirred something in me, a quiet determination I had not felt in years. Jackson and Amanda's 5th wedding anniversary party was approaching, an elaborate affair to be held at their new home. I had received an invitation which felt more like a courtesy than a genuine desire for my presence. I decided not only would I attend, but I would bring the whiskey with me. The evening of the party arrived, and I dressed in my best clothes, a navy suit I had worn to Margaret's funeral and had barely touched since. I carefully placed the whiskey box in a gift bag and drove to the affluent neighborhood where my son now lived. Jackson and Amanda's house was a modern masterpiece of glass and stone, set back from the road, behind tasteful landscaping. Cars worth more than my house lined the circular driveway. I parked my 15-year-old sedan at the far end, suddenly self-conscious about its faded paint and the small dent in the passenger door. Inside the house was filled with people I did not know, all speaking in the confident tones of those accustomed to wealth and influence. Jackson greeted me with a quick hug and a distracted, "Glad you could make it, Dad," before being pulled away by a group of colleagues. I wandered through the party, nodding politely at strangers who barely registered my presence. In the great room with its soaring ceilings and wall of windows overlooking the manicured garden, I finally spotted Harold holding court near the bar, gesturing expansively as he told some story that had his audience captivated. I approached when there was a lull in the conversation, the gift bag clutched perhaps too tightly in my hand. Harold noticed me and smiled that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Dominic, good to see you made it. Quite the achievement Jackson and Amanda are celebrating. Is not it 5 years building a proper life together?" The slight emphasis on proper did not escape me, but I smiled back and extended the bag toward him. "I wanted to give you something, Harold. A token of appreciation, you might say." His eyebrows rose slightly as he accepted the bag, confusion momentarily replacing his usual confidence. He removed the wooden box, and recognition dawned on his face as he saw the Macallan label. "This is unexpected," he said, looking at me with newfound interest. "A fine choice." "It is from Jackson, actually," I said, my voice steady. "He sent it to me for my birthday, but I do not drink whiskey anymore. Have not for years, actually. Doctor's orders for my liver. I thought someone who would truly appreciate it should have it." Harold examined the bottle, then looked back at me, trying to decipher my intention. "That is quite thoughtful of you, Dominic. I believe in things finding their rightful place," I said, "and that bottle belongs with someone who understands its value." For a moment, something like respect flickered in Harold's eyes, quickly replaced by his usual smooth demeanor. "Well, thank you. That is most generous." As I walked away, I caught sight of Jackson watching us from across the room, his expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. I gave him a small nod and continued through the party, feeling lighter than I had in years, though I could not yet understand why. The morning sun was streaming through my kitchen window when the aggressive knock came at my front door. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Jackson stood on my porch, his expensive watch catching the light as he ran his hand through his hair. A gesture I recognized from his childhood, a sign he was agitated. "Dad, what the hell was that about?" he demanded, pushing past me into the house. I closed the door calmly. "Good morning to you too, son. What brings you by so early?" "Do not play dumb," he said, pacing my small living room. "You gave my gift to Harold. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? He cornered me later and asked why I would give you something you could not even use." I sat in my worn armchair, watching my son's anger with a strange detachment. I did not realize it would cause such a problem. I thought it was a nice gesture, giving a fine whiskey to someone who would enjoy it. "Nice gesture," Jackson's voice rose. "You made me look like I do not even know my own father. Like I am some thoughtless jerk who does not care enough to buy an appropriate gift." The irony of his statement hung in the air between us. I let the silence stretch until he finally stopped pacing and looked at me. "Is not that exactly what happened, Jackson?" I asked quietly. His face flushed. "What are you talking about?" "The whiskey. You did not pick it out specifically for me, did you?" Jackson's expression shifted, defensiveness replacing anger. That is not the point. It was still a nice gift. Where did it come from, Jackson, really? He sighed, dropping onto my couch. Fine. It was from a client. We closed a big deal and they sent whiskey to everyone on the team. But that does not mean that you put any thought into what your father might actually want or need. I finished for him. Do you even remember that I have not touched hard liquor in 20 years since the doctor found problems with my liver? The look on his face told me everything. He had no idea. This fundamental fact about my health, something his mother had been so careful about, had completely escaped his notice or memory. I have been sober for 2 decades, Jackson. Your mother used to remind me every Christmas and birthday that I needed to be careful, that I had promised to take care of myself for you. Jackson looked away, the fight leaving him. I did not remember. Okay, I have been busy. Too busy to know the most basic things about your father. I asked, not unkindly, just stating a fact. Do you know what medications I take? Do you know what I do with my days now that I am retired? Do you know that I have been teaching myself guitar, or that I volunteer at the youth center teaching kids basic auto repair? His silence was answer enough. I am not angry, Jackson. I continued, surprising myself with the truth of that statement. I am just tired. Tired of trying to be part of your life when you have made it clear I do not fit into the image you are trying to project. That is not fair, he protested, but weakly. Is not it? When was the last time you invited me to your home just to visit, not for some party where I am merely part of the guest count? When was the last time you asked me about my life instead of talking about Harold's latest business venture or Amanda's family connections? Jackson stood up abruptly. I did not come here to be lectured. I came to tell you that you embarrassed me in front of my father-in-law. The phrase my father-in-law, rather than Amanda's father, did not escape my notice. The distinction spoke volumes. I am sorry you feel embarrassed, I said. That was not my intention. But perhaps this is an opportunity for both of us to be more honest about where we stand. He shook his head, already moving toward the door. I do not have time for this philosophical crap, Dad. I have a meeting in an hour. You always have a meeting, I said softly. Or a deadline or a client. There is always something more important. He paused at the door, and for a moment I thought he might turn back, might finally hear what I was saying. But he simply shook his head and left the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through my empty house. I sat there for a long time afterward, feeling a strange mixture of pain and relief. The conversation had gone exactly as I had expected, and yet putting the truth into words had lifted something heavy from my chest. My phone rang later that afternoon, an unknown number. When I answered, Harold's confident voice filled my ear. Dominic, Harold Thompson here. I was wondering if you might be available for coffee tomorrow. There are some things I would like to discuss with you man to man. I hesitated, suspicious of his motives, but curious nonetheless. Nothing formal, he added, perhaps sensing my reluctance. Just a conversation I think we should have had a long time ago. Against my better judgment, I agreed, setting in motion events I could never have anticipated. Harold suggested we meet at Joe's Diner, a modest establishment on the edge of town, known for its strong coffee and privacy. I was surprised by his choice, having expected some upscale cafe where a simple coffee cost more than an entire meal elsewhere. I arrived early, selecting a booth at the back. Harold entered precisely on time, and I was struck by how different he looked in casual clothes, a simple button-down shirt, and khakis replacing his usual tailored suit. Without his normal trappings of wealth, he seemed smaller somehow, more human. He ordered black coffee, refusing the waitress's offer of the specialty pastries with a polite smile. When we were alone, he took a deep breath, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I owe you an explanation, Dominic," he began, his voice lacking its usual bombastic confidence. "And perhaps an apology as well." I remained silent, waiting. "That whiskey you gave me the other night. It made me think about a lot of things, about authenticity and pretense." He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, staring into it, as if seeking answers in its depths. "Do you know where I grew up, Dominic?" I shook my head. "Millworkers Row in Pittsburgh. My father worked the steel mills for 40 years. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with 7 people. I wore hand-me-downs and worked after-school stocking shelves from the age of 14. This revelation stunned me. Nothing about Harold had ever suggested such humble beginnings. "When I got a scholarship to business school, I reinvented myself," he continued. "I changed my accent, learned which fork to use at fancy dinners, pretended I knew about wine and art. I was terrified someone would discover I was an imposter. So I overcompensated. I became louder, more confident, more dismissive of where I came from." He looked up at me, his eyes showing a vulnerability I had never associated with him. "When I met my wife, Catherine, she came from money, real old money. Her family accepted me because I had proven myself in business, but I always felt I had to justify my place at their table. By the time Amanda was born, I had completely buried my past. I raised her to believe we had always been privileged, that success was her birthright rather than something to be earned." The waitress refilled our coffees, and Harold waited until she had moved away before continuing. "When Amanda brought Jackson home, I saw something in him that reminded me of myself at his age. That hunger to belong, to climb higher. But instead of recognizing it as the same insecurity I had faced, I exploited it. I positioned myself as the gatekeeper to the world he wanted to join, the mentor who could teach him the rules of a game I had once been desperate to learn myself. I found myself leaning forward, captivated by this unexpected confession. "The night you gave me that whiskey, you said something that kept me awake afterward. You said you believed in things finding their rightful place. It struck me because I have spent my entire adult life making sure nothing and no one is in their rightful place, least of all myself." He took a long sip of coffee, grimacing slightly at its bitterness. "When Jackson told me the whiskey was a client gift he had passed along to you, I saw myself in him, and I did not like what I saw. A man so caught up in appearances that he had forgotten what truly matters. I realized I had encouraged the worst parts of him, the parts that would sacrifice authentic relationships for status and approval." I finally spoke, my voice rough with emotion I had not expected to feel. "Why are you telling me all this, Harold?" "Because I think I have done both you and Jackson a disservice," he replied without hesitation. "I inserted myself between a father and son because it fed my ego to be admired and respected by a young man with potential. I tacitly encouraged Jackson to distance himself from his roots, just as I had done, not realizing the cost of such choices until it was almost too late for me." He leaned back, a sad smile on his face. "Catherine left me 3 years ago. Did you know that? We maintain appearances for Amanda's sake, showing up together at functions, but we live separate lives. She told me she could not remember the man she had fallen in love with, that somewhere along the way I had become a caricature of success without substance. This was news to me. Jackson had never mentioned problems between Amanda's parents. The irony is," Harold continued, "after all these years of pretending to be someone else, I find myself envying you, Dominic. You have lived an authentic life. You worked with your hands raised, your son alone stayed true to who you are. There is a dignity in that which all my wealth cannot buy." We sat in silence for a few moments, the revelation settling between us like a physical presence. Jackson is lost, Harold finally said. He is trying so hard to be what he thinks I am, what he thinks Amanda's family expects, that he is in danger of losing himself entirely, just as I did. What do you want from me? I asked, still wary despite his apparent sincerity. Nothing, he replied. But I would like to offer something instead. A chance to repair what I helped break, your relationship with your son. I am not sure that is possible anymore, I admitted. There is too much distance now. Harold shook his head firmly. It is never too late for truth, Dominic. And sometimes it takes a crisis to create an opportunity for healing. Would you be willing to try if I could bring Jackson to the table? I thought about my son, about the boy he had been, and the man I still hoped he could become. Despite everything, the love remained buried, but not extinguished. Yes, I said finally. I would try. Harold nodded, a genuine smile transforming his face. Good. Then let me make arrangements. And Dominic, thank you for the whiskey. It turned out to be far more valuable than either of us could have imagined. As we parted ways outside the diner, I felt a strange sense of possibility, as if something long frozen was beginning to thaw. A week later, I found myself sitting at Harold and Catherine's formal dining table, the tension so thick it seemed to press against my skin. Harold had arranged this dinner with minimal explanation to any of us, simply insisting it was important that we all attend. Jackson and Amanda sat across from me, both looking uncomfortable and slightly irritated at being summoned. Catherine, an elegant woman with kind eyes that belied her reserved demeanor, sat at one end of the table while Harold took the head position. The first course was served in awkward silence, the clinking of silverware against fine china the only sound. Finally, Harold cleared his throat, setting down his fork with deliberate care. I have brought us together tonight because I believe it is time for some honesty in this family. He began, his voice steady, but lacking its usual authoritative tone. Beginning with myself. All eyes turned to him, confusion evident on every face except mine. For most of my adult life, I have presented myself as someone I am not. Harold continued. I have created a narrative about my background, my upbringing, and my values that has been at best a partial truth. Amanda's brow furrowed. Dad, what are you talking about? Harold took a deep breath and began the same story he had shared with me at the diner about his working-class origins, his father in the steel mills, the small house on Millworkers Row. As he spoke, Amanda's expression transformed from confusion to disbelief, while Jackson looked as though the floor was shifting beneath him. I have never taken you to Pittsburgh, never shown you where I grew up because I was ashamed, Harold admitted, looking directly at his daughter. I wanted you to believe you came from a long line of privilege, that you belonged in the social circles I worked so hard to enter. But in doing so, I denied you the chance to know your real heritage, to be proud of how far our family has truly come. Tears welled in Amanda's eyes. Why are you telling us this now? Harold glanced at me before answering. Because last week, Dominic taught me a lesson about authenticity that I could not ignore. When he gave me that bottle of whiskey, explaining so simply that he wanted it to be with someone who would appreciate it, I realized how much of my life has been spent pursuing and accumulating things without true appreciation or joy. Jackson shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. The truth is, Harold continued, I have been living in fear. Fear that if people knew the real me, they would reject me. And I have encouraged the same fear in you, Amanda, and by extension in you, Jackson. I have tacitly approved as you distanced yourself from your father, from your roots, because it validated my own choices. Catherine reached across the table to take her husband's hand, a gesture of support I found surprising, given what he had told me about their separation. "Harold and I have been working on our marriage," she said softly, addressing all of us, but looking at her husband with newfound respect. "Part of that process has been his willingness to finally be honest about his past with me and with himself." Harold squeezed her hand gratefully before turning to Jackson. "I have watched you trying to become the man you think I want you to be, the man you think will impress me and fit into Amanda's world. But that man is a fiction, Jackson. He does not exist because I do not exist, not as you have perceived me." Jackson's face had gone pale. "I do not understand what this has to do with me." "It has everything to do with you," Harold replied. "Because in your effort to emulate what you thought was success, you have been making the same mistakes I made, including turning away from the people who truly love you for who you are, not what you can become." All eyes turned to me, and I felt suddenly exposed, as if my heart had been laid bare on the table alongside the fine china and crystal glasses. "Dominic," Harold said, "perhaps you could share with Jackson what you shared with me about your hopes for him, about the promises you made to Margaret." I had not expected to be put on the spot, but looking at my son's confused face, I knew this might be my only chance to reach him. I took a steadying breath. "Jackson, when your mother was dying, she made me promise that I would always put your happiness first. Not your success, not your achievements, but your happiness. For years, I thought that meant pushing you to reach your potential, to have opportunities I never had. But I think I misunderstood what true happiness means." Jackson's expression softened slightly, his defenses beginning to lower. "I wanted you to climb higher than I ever could," I continued. "But I never wanted you to forget where you started, or to be ashamed of it, of me." "I am not ashamed of you," Jackson protested weakly. "Are not you?" I asked gently. "Then why have you been trying so hard to become someone else? Why do you tense up when I mention the garage or the neighborhood where you grew up? Why did you not want me to be part of your wedding party?" The questions hung in the air, unanswered but impossible to ignore. "Your father worked himself to the bone to give you opportunities, Jackson," Harold said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "He did exactly what my father did for me. The difference is, my father died before I could acknowledge his sacrifice or make amends for the ways I distanced myself from him." Amanda, who had been silent throughout most of the exchange, suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. "I have felt so much pressure," she admitted. "To be perfect, to maintain appearances, to live up to the Thompson name. I have been exhausted trying to be what I thought you wanted, Dad." Harold's face crumpled with regret. "Oh, sweetheart, I am so sorry. I never wanted you to feel that way. I wanted to protect you from the insecurities I felt, but instead, I passed them on to you." The facade was crumbling around the table, years of pretense and performance giving way to raw, uncomfortable truth. Jackson looked from Harold to me, then to Amanda, as if seeing us all clearly for the first time. "I do not know what to say," he finally admitted. "This is a lot to process." "You do not have to say anything right now," I told him. "Just think about what kind of man you truly want to be, not for Harold, not for Amanda, not even for me, for yourself." Jackson nodded slowly, then looked me in the eye for what felt like the first time in years. "I am sorry about the whiskey, Dad. It was thoughtless." "It was just a bottle," I replied. "But it turned out to be the most valuable gift you could have given me, though not in the way either of us expected." Harold raised his water glass. "I would like to propose something. A new beginning for all of us. No more pretending, no more performing, No more valuing things over people or appearances over authenticity. We all raised our glasses, the simple gesture feeling strangely ceremonial, as if we were marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As we continued with dinner, the conversation gradually became easier, more genuine. Jackson asked about my guitar lessons, a detail he must have gleaned from Harold. Amanda shared her doubts about the charity board she had joined primarily for the social connections. Catherine spoke about her painting, a passion she had rekindled during her separation from Harold. By the time dessert was served, something had shifted in the air around us. Nothing was resolved entirely. Years of patterns could not be undone in a single evening, but a door had been opened, and for the first time in a long while I felt hope for my relationship with my son. As we prepared to leave, Jackson approached me, hesitation in his steps, but determination in his eyes. "Dad, would it be okay if I came by this weekend, just to talk, maybe help with that deck repair you mentioned a while back?" The simple offer nearly brought tears to my eyes. "I would like that very much, son." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Me too, Dad. Me too." 6 months have passed since that dinner at Harold and Catherine's home, 6 months of slow but steady healing, of rebuilding connections that had been allowed to wither for too long. Jackson now comes by my house every Sunday, sometimes with Amanda, sometimes alone. At first, our conversations were awkward, decades of distance not easily bridged. But gradually, we found our way back to each other. He helped me replace the weathered boards on my back deck, and I taught him how to properly mix and apply wood stain, just as I had tried to teach him when he was a teenager, more interested in video games than home maintenance. The most surprising development has been my newfound friendship with Harold. Once we moved past the pretense that had defined our earlier interactions, we discovered we had more in common than either of us could have imagined. He joined me at the mechanics club initially, just to observe, but soon he was rolling up his sleeves, remembering skills his father had taught him long ago. The other retired mechanics were suspicious at first of this polished businessman in their midst, but Harold's genuine interest and his willingness to get his hands dirty eventually won them over. Amanda and Catherine have been on their own journey of rediscovery. Catherine started teaching Amanda to cook the simple, hearty dishes from Harold's childhood recipes from his mother that he had never shared. Out of fear, they seemed too common. There is a new authenticity to their family dynamic that has allowed Amanda to relax, to show vulnerability, instead of the perfect façade she had maintained for so long. The most significant change has been in Jackson himself. 3 months ago, he made a decision that shocked everyone in his professional circle, but somehow did not surprise me. He left his high-pressure finance job to start a small custom automobile restoration business, a passion he had suppressed since childhood. I remember how his eyes used to light up watching me work on engines, how naturally he took to understanding mechanical relationships before he decided such interests were beneath his ambitions. His new workshop is modest but growing in reputation. He specializes in vintage American cars, and there is a waiting list of clients who appreciate his meticulous attention to detail. Harold, in a gesture that speaks volumes about his own transformation, became Jackson's first investor, not because the business promised significant returns, but because he believed in his son-in-law's vision and passion. Last month, Amanda shared the news that they are expecting their first child, making me a grandfather, and Harold a grandfather once again. There were tears all around, but none more heartfelt than Harold's, who pulled me aside afterward and said, "We get a second chance, Dominic, to do better with this generation than we did with our own." Today is my 60th birthday, and unlike last year, my house is full of people and laughter. Frank is here along with my friends from the mechanics club. Jackson and Amanda arrived early to help prepare food. Harold and Catherine brought a homemade cake, Catherine proudly announcing she had baked it herself from her grandmother's recipe. After dinner, Jackson presented me with his gift, a handcrafted woodworking set he had commissioned from a local artisan. "For your next hobby, Dad," he said with a genuine smile. "You always said you wanted to try furniture making after you mastered the guitar." The fact that he remembered this casual comment, something I had mentioned months ago in passing, meant more to me than the gift itself, beautiful as it was. Harold approached next, holding a familiar wooden box. Inside was a bottle of Macallan 18-year whiskey, identical to the one from last year. But this time he opened it and poured small measures for everyone except me, for whom he had brought a special bottle of sparkling apple cider. "A toast," Harold announced, raising his glass. "To Dominic, who taught me that the truest gift is not found in what we possess, but in who we allow ourselves to be." As everyone drank, I looked around at the faces of those gathered in my modest living room. My son, his wife, their unborn child, new friends, and old, all brought together by a simple act of giving away something I did not need to someone who could better appreciate it. Sometimes in life we must lose something to understand its true value. For too long, I thought I had lost my son to a world that had no place for me. But in releasing him from my expectations, in allowing him the freedom to find his own way back, I gained something far more precious than I had lost. The whiskey that passed from hand to hand a year ago revealed more than any of us could have anticipated. It showed Jackson the superficiality of thoughtless gifting. It showed Harold the emptiness of his carefully constructed persona. And it showed me that sometimes the most powerful act is not holding on, but letting go. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting the hurt we have experienced. It means refusing to let that hurt determine our future. In forgiving Jackson for his distance, in forgiving Harold for his condescension, and perhaps most importantly, in forgiving myself for the resentment I had harbored, I found a freedom I had not known was possible. As the evening winds down, the three of us, Jackson, Harold, and I, find ourselves sitting on my front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber that remind me of that fateful bottle of whiskey. 3 generations of men, each having taken a different path to reach this moment of quiet companionship. "You know, Dad," Jackson says quietly, "I think Mom would be proud of where we ended up." I think she would. I agree, feeling Margaret's presence in the gentle evening breeze. Sometimes the most valuable whiskey is not the one with the highest price tag, but the one that opens a door to truth and heals what has been broken. Have you ever had a small gesture or decision lead to unexpected healing in your family? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding dignity and healing in life's most challenging relationships. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late for reconciliation. Thank you for joining me today. Remember, true wealth is not measured in dollars or possessions, but in the authenticity of our connections with those we love.